All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're connecting the dots between three massive global shifts that honestly might seem totally separate at first glance. But as you'll see, they're actually deeply intertwined. We're looking at acute human emergencies on the ground, the very real collapse of our environmental systems, and this unprecedented, literally explosive surge in global climate litigation. It's a massive, complex puzzle of cause and effect. To really wrap our heads around it, we're going to be looking at some hard data from the World Food Programme, the UN's Climate and Biodiversity Panels, and the London School of Economics.
To make sense of this giant web, here's our roadmap for today. First, the human toll of 2026. Second, the climate biodiversity doom loop. Third, nature-based solutions under threat. Fourth, the courtroom climate battlefield. And finally, pushback and policy complexities.
So, starting us off with Section 1, the human toll of 2026, widespread acute food insecurity.
We really have to start at ground level here, looking at the visceral human stakes. And to grasp the sheer scale of this crisis, we're pulling from the World Food Programme's 10th Global Report on Food Crises. The data highlights a severity that is, frankly, unprecedented, and it all boils down to this number, 2. For the very first time in this report's entire 10-year history, 2 famines were confirmed in the exact same year. In 2025, famine conditions were declared in parts of the Gaza Strip and in Sudan. And the data warns us that we are absolutely not out of the woods yet. The risks of these famines, alongside some truly extreme conditions in places like South Sudan, are persisting right into 2026.
And this really brings the human cost into focus. Seeing people forced to wade through severe floodwaters like this, it reminds us that massive food shortages and survival crises don't just happen in a vacuum. They're deeply, deeply linked to and heavily exacerbated by severe environmental and climate shocks. When extreme weather completely wipes out infrastructure, local agriculture, and access to safe water, this level of human vulnerability is the direct result.
Which brings us to Section 2, the climate biodiversity doom loop, and mutually reinforcing crises.
Now, the data from the UNFCCC reveals something pretty alarming. These human tragedies, they're actually symptoms of a much larger disease. We aren't just dealing with a climate crisis over here and a biodiversity crisis over there. No, they are forming this massive doom loop. Climate change destroys ecosystems, and the destruction of those ecosystems just accelerates climate change. The UN's Biodiversity Panel, IPBES, definitely doesn't mince words about this. As their global assessment stresses, the time for incremental baby steps is totally over. Current trajectories are failing us. Delaying action on decarbonizing our economy and restoring these ecosystems is now way more costly to human society than acting immediately. They're telling us we need absolutely transformative changes.
Let's take a look at how these risks escalate straight from the IPCC. Notice the columns here. That transition from yellow to red and then purple, that represents the shift from moderate to very high, completely irreversible risks. Exceeding 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming threatens some terrifying tipping points. We're talking about things like an ice-free Arctic summer, the widespread death of warm water corals, and devastating reductions in global crop yields like maize. And of course, that loops right back to the acute food insecurity we were just talking about.
Moving right along to Section 3, nature-based solutions under threat. The promise and peril of ecosystem management.
So, if our planetary systems are breaking down, how exactly are we trying to fix them on a global scale? Well, we're leaning heavily on what are called nature-based solutions, or NBS. The really crucial point here is that nature-based solutions are this incredible dual tool. By conserving and restoring biodiversity, things like protecting wetlands or replanting ancient forests, we can actually capture carbon and adapt to extreme weather at the exact same time. The science suggests that if we actually do this right, these solutions could provide up to a third of the climate mitigation we need by 2030, all while making our food supply much more resilient. It's a huge opportunity.
In practice, this creates what researchers call a multifunctional seascape and landscape. Notice those vital natural corridors, the yellow arrows and green pathways you see crossing these shared spaces where humans and nature coexist. These are absolutely critical because they allow species to migrate as the climate shifts. It keeps the ecosystems healthy so they can keep providing us with things we literally need to survive, like natural water filtration and buffering against extreme disasters.
But, and this is a massive but, the science clearly warns that poorly designed solutions can backfire terribly. For instance, if we just go out and plant massive non-native tree plantations just to burn them for bioenergy, we actually destroy local biodiversity. Even worse, it triggers competition for land that can directly worsen the exact food insecurity we saw in the World Food Programme report.
On top of that, as temperatures rise, stressed ecosystems like forests and wetlands can actually flip. They go from being vital carbon sinks that absorb CO2 to becoming massive carbon sources that release it. It's a dangerous tightrope.
That brings us to Section 4, the Courtroom Climate Battlefield, Society's Institutional Response.
With ecological systems failing, international goals being missed, and global policies moving at a snail's pace, society is increasingly turning to a totally different arena to force accountability: the legal system. The London School of Economics recently released their 2026 snapshot on global climate litigation, and wow, it reveals a staggering timeline of acceleration. Before 2015, sure, cases were accumulating, but pretty gradually. Then came the Paris Agreement. Since then, we've seen an absolute explosion in lawsuits, with over 75% of all historic cases filed post-2015. In 2025 alone, 249 new cases were filed. That brings the global total in 2026 to over 3,600 cases across 62 different countries. The courtroom has officially become a primary battleground for climate action.
And the types of cases we're seeing are evolving rapidly. International apex courts, like the International Court of Justice, are now consolidating climate action as a strict legal duty for nations, not just some optional political choice. Meanwhile, plaintiffs are launching massive, systemic, polluter pays cases. They're demanding huge financial damages from corporate polluters across the energy, finance, and transport sectors. Get this. In 2025 alone, over 50 strategic cases were filed strictly against companies. We're even seeing insurance companies stepping into the ring, suing governments to recover financial losses linked to climate change. The net is widening, and it's widening fast.
Finally, Section 5, Pushback and Policy Complexities, the friction of the energy transition. Now, all this legal action, it has generated immense friction, thrusting courts right into the messy, incredibly complex reality of actually implementing the energy transition. We are seeing a stark, head-to-head contrast playing out here. On one side, you have climate advocates aggressively expanding their legal reach to enforce emission standards and protect ecosystems. On the flip side, institutional opponents, particularly in places like the US, are deploying highly coordinated pushback. This includes things like SLAPS, which stands for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation, as well as specific legislative interventions designed to shut these cases down and shrink the judicial space available for climate advocates. It's a major tug of war.
And here's the thing. Even when climate advocates win, the LSE report points out a pretty sobering reality about implementation. Winning a judgment in court is really only half the battle. A judge's order doesn't magically lower emissions or instantly restore a wetland. It requires sustained political will and serious legal follow-through to actually enforce those changes on the ground and weave them into lasting public policy. So, bringing this all together, from the World Food Programme's terrifying famine warnings to that irreversible biodiversity doom loop, right up to the explosive battles happening in courtrooms across 62 countries, we are left with one absolutely crucial question. As legal victories multiply, but those ecological tipping points loom dangerously close, will courtroom mandates and policy shifts actually translate to real-world survival in time? It really is the defining question for the systems we rely on to live. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to dig into these reports yourself.